My name is Natalie, and I am an architect. For the longest time, that felt like only half a truth. A title I was allowed to borrow but never truly own. When my brother and his wife begged me to save the company they had systematically and cruelly pushed me out of, they expected me to come back with a proposal, a rescue plan, maybe even a plea for my old position. They saw me as the same woman they had cast aside, the one whose ideas were too emotional for the cold, hard world of construction. They were wrong. Instead of a lifeline, I brought them a set of blueprints. They weren't for their dying company. They were for my new one. And those blueprints represented the single multi-million-dollar contract they had been banking on to save themselves from ruin. The contract my firm had just won. Before I dive into the story of how I turned their greatest betrayal into my defining victory, I'd love to know where you all are watching from today. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've ever been underestimated or had your passion dismissed by someone who was supposed to be on your side, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know we're not alone in these struggles. And of course, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to join our community of storytellers and survivors. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to a time when the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut lumber was the smell of home, and to the man who taught me that a building should be more than just a structure. It should have a soul. My father, Thomas Miller, was a man carved from the same sturdy oak he favored in his custom homes. He wasn't a talker, not in the way that filled a room with noise, but his words, when they came, were like perfectly measured cornerstones, solid, essential, and meant to last. He started Miller and Son Construction with little more than a beat-up pickup truck, a set of second-hand tools, and a belief that a person's integrity was built into everything they made. The company name was a product of its time, a hopeful nod to a future he envisioned for my older brother, Leo. I was born a few years after the sign was first painted, a daughter in a world my father had already designated for a son. But it never felt that way with him. While Leo was outside learning to swing a hammer, my father would sit with me at the big drafting table in his home office, the paper smelling faintly of graphite and coffee. He'd unroll massive blueprints, and with a calloused finger that was surprisingly gentle, he'd trace the lines, explaining the flow of a room, the importance of morning light in a kitchen, the way a roofline could either fight the sky or welcome it. A house isn't just a box to keep the rain out, Nat, he'd tell me, his voice a low rumble. It's a container for a life. You have to think about the people who will live there. How will they feel when they walk through that door? Will it lift them up? He wasn't just teaching me architecture. He was teaching me empathy, showing me how to build feelings into physical space. He was the one who saw my childish crayon drawings of fantastical castles and didn't see scribbles. He saw floor plans. He bought me my first set of drafting pencils, my first T-square, and when I declared I was going to be an architect, his smile was the only approval I ever needed. He was proud. Leo, on the other hand, saw it as a quaint hobby, like my collection of sea glass or my brief obsession with pottery. He was being groomed for the real work, the budgets, the contracts, the management. He was the son in Miller and Son. I was just the artistic daughter, a charming accessory to the family business. The cancer that took my father was swift and merciless, a storm that swept through our lives and left a hollow silence in its wake. The funeral was a blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and the suffocating scent of lilies. Leo was stoic, the dutiful son accepting sympathies, while his wife, Sarah, stood beside him like a sentinel, her hand possessively on his arm. I felt adrift, the anchor of my world gone. A week later, we sat in the sterile, wood-paneled office of Mr. Sterling, our family's longtime lawyer. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken expectations. I fully expected my father to have left the business to Leo, with perhaps a trust fund or a portfolio of stocks for me. It would have hurt, but it would have made a certain kind of conventional sense. Mr. Sterling, a kind man with sad eyes who had known me since I was a little girl, cleared his throat and began to read from the will. When he reached the section about Miller and Son Construction, the words that came out rearranged the very molecules in the room. My father had left the company jointly, a 50-50 split of ownership and control, to both his children, Leo Miller and Natalie Miller. For a moment, there was just the hum of the air conditioning. I felt a surge of overwhelming love and gratitude for my father. Even in his final act, he had seen me. He had validated my passion, my years of study, my entire being. He believed I was just as capable as my brother. He saw us as partners. I looked at Leo, expecting to share a moment of tearful understanding, a silent promise to honor our father's last wish. Instead, I saw something else. His face was a mask of polite shock, but a muscle in his jaw was twitching. Sarah, however, had no such filter. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips, a sound like a chipping teacup. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that would soon become painfully familiar. "Isn't that progressive of him?" Leo shot her a look, but it wasn't one of admonishment. It was one of shared disbelief. He turned to me, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Nat. This is great. We'll be a team." But the word team sounded foreign and awkward on his tongue. Later, as we were leaving, I overheard Sarah whisper to him in the hallway, her voice a venomous hiss. "Don't you worry, honey. We all know who's going to be handling the real business. Let her have her little title. It's a nice gesture." That was the moment the ground began to shift beneath my feet. My father's will wasn't a foundation for a partnership. It was the starting pistol for a war I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting. They didn't see me as an equal partner. They saw me as a problem to be managed. The first few months were a masterclass in subtle sabotage. My official title was co-owner and head of design, a fact that seemed to be treated as a charming eccentricity by my brother and his wife. Sarah, who had no official role but had appointed herself as some sort of de facto brand manager, would constantly refer to my office as my studio or my creative corner, as if I were a hobbyist finger painting in the basement. They reveled in the division of labor they had created in their own minds. Leo was the brain, the strategist, the one who handled the money and the serious clients. I was the heart, the visionary, a term they use with a faint, patronizing smirk meant to handle the aesthetics and keep things looking pretty. The first major test came with the Henderson project. It was a chance to build a legacy home for a wealthy tech mogul and his family. A project that could put Miller Construction on the map in a whole new way. I poured my soul into the design. I spent weeks talking to the Hendersons, not just about the number of bedrooms they wanted, but about how they lived. I learned that Mr. Henderson was an amateur astronomer, so I designed a study with a retractable skylight. I learned that their youngest daughter was a passionate musician, so I designed a soundproofed music room with acoustics that would rival a professional studio. The entire design was built around the concept of connectedness, with open sightlines, flowing spaces, and a massive 2-story wall of glass that looked out onto an ancient oak tree the family cherished. It was ambitious, it was modern, and it was deeply personal. It was, I believed, the very embodiment of what my father had taught me. I presented the blueprints in the main conference room. The Hendersons were visibly impressed, their faces lighting up as I walked them through the virtual 3D model, They loved the personal touches, the way the design seemed to understand them. I felt a swell of pride, a sense that I was truly honoring my father's legacy. Then Leo spoke. "It's certainly a beautiful vision, Nat," he began, his tone that of a patient teacher correcting a promising but naive student. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, effectively positioning himself between me and the clients. But we also need to be practical. These kinds of flowing organic shapes can be a real bear on the budget. And all this glass. He shook his head with a theatrical sigh. The heating costs alone. I've taken the liberty of drafting a more streamlined alternative. He unrolled a second set of blueprints. It was a box. A large, expensive, and utterly soulless box. It had the same number of rooms, but my design's heart had been surgically removed. The retractable skylight was gone, replaced by a standard window. The music room was just another square on the floor plan. The magnificent glass wall was reduced to a generic sliding door. It was cheaper, yes. It was also devoid of any character or life. Before I could even find the words to defend my design, to explain that I had already factored in the cost of high-efficiency insulated glass, Sarah chimed in, her voice as smooth as polished marble. "Natalie has such a wonderful emotional connection to her work," she said, smiling warmly at the Hendersons, but the smile was a weapon aimed at me. "It's what makes her so brilliant with the final touches. She'll be absolutely invaluable when it comes to picking out the color palettes and the furniture. Once we've locked down the actual structure, of course." The room fell silent. She had done it so skillfully, so surgically. In 2 sentences, she had reduced me from an architect to an interior decorator. She had framed my passion as a feminine frivolity and Leo's soulless cost-cutting as masculine pragmatism. Mr. Henderson, a man who dealt in code and logic, looked from my passionate, complex design to Leo's simple, boring box, and I could see the conflict on his face. He was being told, implicitly, that my design was the emotional choice, and Leo's was the smart one. My arguments about structural integrity and innovative materials were lost. I was a woman talking about feelings. My brother was a man talking about numbers. In their world, the numbers always won. They went with Leo's design, with the promise that I would have full creative control over the interiors. It was my first major defeat, and the humiliation tasted like ash in my mouth. I went back to my creative corner that day and stared at my father's photograph on my desk, a single hot tear rolling down my cheek. "I'm trying, Dad," I whispered to the silence. "I'm really trying." The Henderson project set the template for the months that followed. My role was systematically eroded, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I was the company's designated dreamer, brought into meetings to present initial, exciting concepts that would get clients in the door, only to have Leo and Sarah swoop in later to value engineer them into oblivion. They would praise my vision in public while privately dismissing it as impractical. The phrase "too emotional" became their go-to weapon. A design for a community library that prioritized natural light and quiet, secluded reading nooks, was too emotional. It didn't maximize the square footage for shelving. A plan for a small medical clinic that used warm woods and a circular layout to reduce patient anxiety was too emotional. A standard grid was more cost-effective. Every time I tried to argue, to bring up the principles my father had built the company on, I was met with the same patronizing calm. "Nat, you're getting too attached," Leo would say, shaking his head. "It's just a building. You can't let your feelings get in the way of the bottom line." He was quoting the exact opposite of what our father had taught us, and he didn't even realize it. Or worse, he did, and he just didn't care. To make matters worse, they began to isolate me from the operational side of the business. My name would be, accidentally, left off important email chains with engineers and city planners. When I would ask for the budget reports, Leo would wave a hand dismissively. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that, Nat. It's all boring numbers. You just focus on making things look good." The condescension was suffocating. I felt like a ghost in my own company, a silent partner whose only job was to provide a veneer of creativity that they could exploit and then discard. There was a particularly painful family dinner at Leo and Sarah's house during this period. It was their anniversary, a small gathering with a few of their friends. One of Sarah's friends, a woman named Chloe who worked in finance, asked me what it was like being an architect. Before I could answer, Sarah jumped in with a tinkling laugh. "Oh, Natalie is our secret weapon. She swoops in and makes everything beautiful. We call her the house whisperer. She just has this sixth sense for color and texture." The table chuckled appreciatively. I felt my face burn with a quiet, impotent rage. I had a master's degree in architecture. I could calculate load-bearing capacities in my sleep. I understood HVAC systems and soil mechanics. And here I was, being celebrated for my ability to pick out complementary shades of beige. Leo, hearing the exchange, raised his wine glass. "To my sister," he said, a magnanimous smile plastered on his face. "She keeps us from building boring boxes." And the entire table, my brother included, was oblivious to the crushing irony of that statement. Because building boring boxes was exactly what they had been doing ever since they had started ignoring my designs. I excused myself to the restroom and splashed cold water on my face, looking at my reflection in their ridiculously ornate mirror. "Who are you?" I asked the woman staring back at me. "Are you an architect, or are you the court jester?" The final definitive break came with the proposal for the new downtown branch of a regional bank. It was a big deal. A commercial project that required a blend of modern security and a welcoming public face. I worked for a month on a design I was incredibly proud of. It featured a stunning, cantilevered entrance and a green roof that would be a small pocket of nature in the concrete jungle. It was innovative, secure, and beautiful. I presented it to Leo and Sarah in our office. They listened, nodding thoughtfully. "It's very dramatic, Natalie," Leo said, tapping his pen on the table. "I like the ambition." For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this time would be different. A week later, I was out of the office doing a site visit for a smaller project, a kitchen remodel they had deemed perfect for my talents, when I got a call from a friend who worked at the bank. "Hey, Nat," he said, "just saw the final proposal from your company. Looks solid, very practical." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "The final proposal?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "But the presentation isn't until next week." There was a pause on the other end of the line. No. Your brother and his wife just left our office an hour ago. They walked us through the whole thing." My blood ran cold. I drove back to the office in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I walked straight past the receptionist and into Leo's office. He and Sarah were there, looking smug. On the conference table was a set of blueprints. I unrolled them. It was my design, but it had been butchered. The dramatic, cantilevered entrance was gone, replaced by a cheap, flat facade. The green roof had been scrapped in favor of a standard tar and gravel one. They had taken the soul of my work, kept the basic layout, and presented it as their own, more sensible version. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. "You went behind my back? You presented this without me?" Leo had the audacity to look offended. "We're a team, Natalie. We made an executive decision. Your design was too risky, too expensive. We refined it." "You didn't refine it," I shot back, my voice rising. "You mutilated it. You stole my work and passed it off as your own." Sarah stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. "That is enough," she said, her voice like ice. "You are being hysterical. This is precisely the kind of emotional outburst that makes you a liability. This isn't about your feelings or your precious designs. This is about the health of this company, a company that you are actively trying to harm with your ego." The word hysterical hung in the air, a deliberate, gendered barb designed to dismiss and invalidate everything I was feeling. It was the final straw. The rage inside me suddenly cooled, replaced by a chilling clarity. I was done. I was done fighting a battle I was never meant to win. I was done trying to earn the respect of people who were incapable of giving it. I was done being the ghost in my father's house. "You're right," I said, my voice suddenly calm, which seemed to unnerve them more than my shouting had. "This isn't working." I looked from my brother's stunned face to his wife's triumphant one. "I won out." A slow predatory smile spread across Sarah's face. This was what she had wanted all along. Leo, to his credit, looked momentarily conflicted, a flicker of something, guilt, regret, in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a look of weary resignation. "If that's what you want, Nat," he said quietly. They presented me with a buyout offer a few days later. It was a pittance, a fraction of what my half of the company was worth. But they framed it as a generous act of rescue. "The company's finances aren't great right now," Leo explained, avoiding my gaze. "Your ambitious projects have put a strain on things. This is the best we can do. It's either this, or we risk running the whole thing into the ground, and Dad's legacy's gone forever." It was the ultimate emotional blackmail, blaming me for the very financial situation they had created by sidelining my profitable, high-value designs in favor of their own cheap, uninspired ones. I was exhausted. The fight had gone out of me. I looked at the papers, at the clause that signed away my birthright, my father's dream. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I signed my name. I packed up my office that same day, my books, my drafting tools, the photograph of my father. As I walked out the door for the last time, Sarah was on the phone, her voice bright and cheerful. "Yes, Miller & Son is entering a new, more streamlined era," she was saying. "We're all very excited for the future." I didn't look back. The year that followed was a long, slow descent into a gray fog. The meager buyout money paid my rent and bills, but it did little to fill the cavernous hole that had been carved into my life. I had lost more than a company. I had lost my identity. I was an architect who didn't build, a designer with nothing to design. My passion, which had once been a blazing fire, was now a pile of cold embers. For months, I did nothing. I would wake up late, watch mindless television, and go to bed early. I avoided the parts of town where Miller & Son projects were underway, the sight of their logo on a construction fence a physical blow. The sense of failure was a constant, heavy cloak. I had not only lost my inheritance, I felt I had failed my father. I had let his legacy be corrupted and stolen, and I had been too weak to stop it. The self-doubt that my brother and Sarah had so carefully planted had taken root and was now a choking vine. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe my ideas are impractical. Maybe I should have just stuck to decorating. That thought was the most poisonous of all. One afternoon, desperate for income, I answered an ad for a freelance consultant. It led me to a phone call with the manager of a chain of dental clinics. He wanted someone to liven up their waiting rooms. "We're thinking some new paint, maybe some calming artwork," he said cheerfully. "Something to take people's minds off the drilling." I sat there on my sofa, the phone pressed to my ear, and listened to him talk about shades of blue and the durability of vinyl seating. This was it. This was what my brother and Sarah believed I was good for. Choosing paint for a dentist's office. I felt a lump form in my throat, a hot, painful pressure behind my eyes. I politely ended the call, promising to send him a portfolio I had no intention of sending. I hung up the phone, curled into a ball on my couch, and for the first time since the funeral, I wept. I cried for my father, for my stolen dream, for the confident, passionate young woman I used to be. I cried until there were no tears left, just a hollow, aching emptiness. It was, in every sense of the word, my rock bottom. A few weeks later, seeking refuge from my own apartment, I was sitting in a small independent coffee shop, sketching idly in a notebook for the first time in months. It was nothing, just patterns and shapes, but it was something to do with my hands. I'd know that line work anywhere. The voice was deep and familiar, and it startled me. I looked up to see Arthur Vance, my former thesis advisor from architecture school, smiling down at me. Arthur was a legend in the city, a semi-retired architect whose own work was iconic. He was a man whose opinion carried immense weight and the last person I wanted to see in my current state of disgrace. He gestured to the empty chair opposite me. "May I?" I nodded, my heart pounding with a mixture of pleasure and shame. He sat down, his eyes, framed by laugh lines, crinkling at the corners. "I haven't seen your name on anything recently, Natalie," he said gently. "What have you been creating?" The question was so direct, so kind, and it broke something open in me. The carefully constructed dam of my pride crumbled, and the whole story came pouring out. The Will, Leo, and Sarah, the too emotional insults, the forced buyout, the soul-crushing defeat. I expected him to offer pity, maybe a platitude or two. Instead, he got angry on my behalf. He listened patiently until I was finished, his expression growing more thunderous with every word. When I was done, he leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Let me tell you something, Natalie," he said, his voice a low growl. "Those fools, those utter, complete fools, to have a diamond in their hands and complain that it's too shiny. Your student work had more soul and more structural integrity than half the professionally built garbage I see going up in this city. Don't you dare let a couple of soulless bean counters convince you that emotion is a liability in architecture. Emotion is what separates a building from a spreadsheet. It's what separates art from a mere container. Your father knew that, and you know it too." His words were like a splash of ice water, a jolt to a system that had been shut down for months. He saw me. Not the hysterical woman, not the decorator, but the architect. He saw my talent, and his belief in me was so absolute, so unwavering, that it began to chip away at the fortress of my own self-doubt. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. He didn't just give me a pep talk. He gave me a roadmap. He told me to stop mourning what I had lost and start building something new. "Being underestimated is a superpower, Natalie," he said as he stood to leave. "They won't see you coming." He left me his card. "Call me when you're ready. I know some people who appreciate real talent." That conversation was the turning point. It was the first shovelful of earth in the foundation of my new life. The fire was back. It started as a tiny flickering ember, but Arthur's words had fanned it into a flame. I went home that day and dug out my old college portfolios, spreading them across my living room floor. I saw the passion, the audacity, the raw talent the judges had praised. Arthur was right. My brother was wrong. I spent the next week drafting a business plan. I took the last of my buyout money, combined it with my savings, and secured a small business loan from a credit union that focused on women-owned startups. It was just enough. I found a tiny second-floor office for rent above a French bakery in a less fashionable but up-and-coming part of town. The rent was cheap, the space was cramped, and the air was perpetually filled with the glorious, comforting scent of fresh bread and melting butter. I named my new firm Ethel Architecture. Ethel was an Old English word I had stumbled upon, meaning noble. It felt right. I wanted to build things with nobility, with purpose. It was a quiet promise to myself and a tribute to the principles my father had held so dear. My first, and for a long time only, employee was Mark, a brilliant, fiercely loyal young graduate I found through a posting at my old university. He had been a fan of my student work and was horrified when I told him what had happened at Miller & Son. He was hungry to learn and shared my belief that architecture should serve people, not just budgets. Our first few months were a blur of hard work and cheap takeout. We were a tiny 2-person operation trying to compete with established giants. We took on any project we could get, no matter how small. Our first real break came from a referral from Arthur Vance. It was a cafe renovation for a young couple who had sunk their life savings into their dream. They had a shoestring budget, but a huge vision. They couldn't afford the big firms, but they saw the passion in our proposal. I poured everything I had into that little cafe. I used reclaimed wood to save money, designed custom, multifunctional furniture to maximize the small space, and created a lighting scheme that made the cafe feel warm and inviting at all hours. Mark and I worked side by side, painting walls, sanding floors, doing whatever it took. When it opened, the cafe was an instant hit. It got a small feature in a local design blog, which then got picked up by a city magazine. The article praised the genius use of space and the warm human-centric design. It called Ethel Architecture a Firm to Watch. We framed the article and hung it on our tiny office wall. It was our first victory, and it felt more satisfying than any of the multi-million-dollar projects I had worked on at Miller & Son. Slowly, project by project, we began to build a reputation. A small bookstore, a modern addition to a historic home, a pro bono design for a dog shelter. Our work was defined by its intelligence, its warmth, and its soul. We were the opposite of the cold corporate architecture that was becoming a blight on the city. We were small, but we were making a name for ourselves. During this time, I would occasionally hear whispers about Miller & Son. Suppliers I worked with would shake their heads, talking about unpaid invoices. A contractor I hired mentioned that working with Leo had become a nightmare. His plans were rigid, his cost-cutting was leading to shoddy work, and he was alienating subcontractors. I overheard a conversation at a coffee shop between 2 real estate agents about a Miller & Son condo development that was stalled due to a lawsuit over water damage from a poorly designed roof. A green roof I had originally proposed had been replaced by Leo's cheap, flat alternative. It brought me a grim, quiet satisfaction, but it was also tinged with sadness. That was my father's name being dragged through the mud. Then came the announcement. The city was launching its most ambitious public project in a generation, the Lakeside Beacon Pavilion. It was to be a new landmark, a cultural hub on the waterfront, a symbol of the city's future. The design competition was open to all firms, and the winner would be awarded a massive city-funded contract. It was the project of a lifetime. In my tiny office, surrounded by the smell of croissants, Mark and I looked at each other. His eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and excitement. "We should go for it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to." I knew he was right. This was more than just a contract. It was a chance to make a statement, to build something truly noble. At the same time, the rumors about Miller and Son reached a fever pitch. I learned through Arthur that they were on the brink of collapse. The lawsuit had been costly, clients were fleeing, and their reputation was in tatters. They were hemorrhaging money. The Beacon project was their last hope. It was their Hail Mary pass. If they won that contract, the massive cash infusion and the prestige could save them. Suddenly, the competition wasn't just professional, it was personal. My fledgling firm, built on the very principles they had mocked, was now going head-to-head with my father's corrupted legacy for the one prize that could determine both our futures. The stage was set, and I had no intention of losing. We worked around the clock for 2 months. I have never been more focused in my life. The design came to me in a flash of inspiration, a perfect synthesis of everything I believed in. It was shaped like a sail, a nod to the lake, but also like a sheltering wing. It used sustainable materials, geothermal heating and cooling, and a public green roof that would give the community a new park with a stunning view of the skyline. It was bold, it was beautiful, and it was deeply connected to its environment and its purpose. It was, I knew with a certainty that resonated in my bones, the best work I had ever done. We submitted the proposal on the final day, our hearts in our throats. And then we waited. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't from the city. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in a year, a number I thought I had deleted, but had apparently just buried deep in my contacts. It was Leo. My hand hovered over the phone, my heart starting a frantic, panicked drumbeat against my ribs. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and answered. "Hello? Nat? Natalie, it's me." His voice was different. The arrogant, dismissive tone was gone, replaced by a strained, desperate cheerfulness that was somehow even more unnerving. It was the voice of a man trying to sell a used car that he knew had a cracked engine block. "Hey, long time, no talk. How have you been?" We engaged in a few moments of excruciatingly awkward small talk. He asked about my little business, if I was keeping busy. I gave him clipped, non-committal answers. Finally, he got to the point. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. "The reason I'm calling, we have some really big things happening over here, some exciting opportunities. And, well, Sarah and I were talking, and we think it's time. We want you to come back." I almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. "Come back," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yeah, we need to talk. Let's meet at the office. Tomorrow, for old time's sake. We've got a proposal for you." I knew exactly what this was about. The Beacon decision was imminent. They were panicking. They thought they could snap their fingers and I would come running back to fix the mess they had made. A year ago, I would have been a wreck of emotions. But now, a strange cold calm settled over me. "Okay, Leo," I said, my voice as smooth and cool as glass. "I'll be there, 10 o'clock. After I hung up, Mark looked at me, his face pale with concern. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked at the final renderings of our Beacon pavilion design pinned to the wall. A slow smile spread across my face. "I'm going to a meeting," I said, "and I'm going to bring a proposal of my own." The next morning, I walked into the lobby of the Miller and Son building. The last time I had been here, I had walked out in defeat, a ghost leaving her own haunting. Today, I felt a powerful sense of purpose. I was dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, my leather portfolio clutched in my hand like a shield. The office itself felt different. The expensive leather chairs in the waiting area looked worn. The chrome on the reception desk was smudged, and the lush green plants that Sarah had been so proud of were brown at the edges, their leaves wilting. It was still a facade of success, but there were cracks in the veneer if you knew where to look. The receptionist, a new girl I didn't recognize, looked up at me with a bored expression that quickly changed to one of slight panic when I announced my name. She fumbled with the phone. "Mr. Miller, your sister is here." Sarah emerged from the hallway first. She was wearing a dress that was trying too hard. A brittle, 1,000-watt smile stretched across her face. "Natalie, you look wonderful. Yeah, I see," she chirped, air kissing the space a foot from my cheek. "We're so glad you could make it." Her eyes, however, were doing a frantic, calculating scan, taking in my suit, my expensive shoes, my confident posture. She was reassessing the threat level. Leo came out of his office, and the change in him was shocking. He looked 10 years older. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. The easy, swaggering confidence was gone, replaced by the jittery energy of a gambler on a losing streak. "Nat, great to see you," he said, shaking my hand. His palm was damp. They led me into the main conference room, the very room where I had been humiliated time and time again. They sat me down at the massive mahogany table, a caricature of a powerful board meeting. Sarah fussed around, offering me coffee, water, her movements jerky and unnatural. They were trying to project an aura of control, of being the ones in charge, but the desperation was rolling off them in waves. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. They were predators who had lost their teeth, trying to intimidate their prey by gumming it. They started with more painful small talk, asking me about my work with a faint interest that was almost comical. Then Leo, with a deep theatrical breath, launched into his pitch. It was a masterclass in self-serving revisionist history. "So, Nat," he began, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret, "we've done a lot of thinking, and we've come to realize we may have been a bit hasty a year ago, a bit too focused on the numbers." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "This company, it's been missing something. It's been missing your spark, your vision, your heart." The words, which would have once been all I ever wanted to hear, now sounded hollow and manipulative. He was trying to use the very qualities he had mocked as a way to lure me back in. He was trying to sell me my own soul, pretending it was a gift. "So," he continued, getting to the crux of it, "we have some massive projects on the horizon, game changers, and we want to bring you back on board. We've created a new position just for you, Head of Creative Development and Interior Design." I let the title hang in the air. Head of Creative Development and Interior Design. It was the same box, the exact same gilded cage they had locked me in before, just with a fancier nameplate. They weren't offering me my ownership back. They weren't offering me a partnership. They weren't even offering a real apology. They were offering me a job, a demotion, a leash. Sarah jumped in, her voice oozing with false magnanimity. "You can do all the fun, creative stuff that you love so much, Natalie," she said, as if speaking to a child. "You can make everything beautiful, and you can let us worry about all the boring, stressful business stuff. It's the perfect arrangement. We can be a family again, working together." I looked at their expectant faces. They genuinely believed this was a generous offer. They had learned nothing. They still saw me as the emotional, flighty little sister who could be placated with a shiny title and a chance to play with color swatches. They had no concept of who I had become, what I had built, or what I was capable of. The rage I had expected to feel wasn't there. In its place was just a profound, bottomless pity. They were dinosaurs, oblivious to the asteroid that was about to hit. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the way their smiles began to twitch, the way Leo started nervously tapping his pen on the table. Finally, I gave a small, sad smile. "That's a very, interesting offer," I said, my voice even. "But I'm afraid I have to decline." Leo's face fell. "But why? This is a great opportunity." "Because," I said, my voice gaining strength, "I'm already quite busy with my own projects." I reached down and placed my leather portfolio on the gleaming mahogany. With a deliberate, unhurried movement, I unfastened the straps. I didn't say another word. I simply pulled out the large, rolled-up sheets and spread them across the table, covering their pathetic proposal, notes, and financial documents. It was the centerpiece of my design for the Lakeside Beacon Pavilion. A stunning, full-color, 3D rendering of the completed project. The sail-like roof soared against a twilight sky, the lights from within casting a warm golden glow onto the surrounding park. It was breathtaking. Leo and Sarah stared at the image, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. What is this?" Leo stammered, his eyes darting from the blueprint to my face. "It's beautiful, but what does this have to do with anything?" I finally looked him directly in the eye. I let him see the steel in my gaze. "That," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of a bell in the silent room, "is the winning design for the Lakeside Beacon Pavilion." I paused, letting the words sink in. The City Council announced their final decision this morning. My firm, Ethel Architecture, was awarded the full contract less than an hour ago. I came here directly from the signing. The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was not an absence of noise. It was a living, breathing entity, thick and heavy and absolute. It was the sound of a world ending. Sarah's face, which had been a mask of strained friendliness, seemed to crumble. The color drained away, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed shock. Her meticulously applied lipstick stood out like a gash against her pale skin. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Leo just stared at the blueprint, his mind visibly struggling to process the information. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. I could see the sequence of emotions play out across his face in horrifying slow motion. First, confusion, then dawning comprehension, then stark, undiluted panic, and finally, a wave of sickening, impotent rage. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in denial. "Number, that's not possible. We were the finalists. They told us. They said they were going with a more community-focused and soulful design," I finished for him, quoting the phrase the council chairman had used when he'd shaken my hand. "They said it was a unanimous decision." I watched as the full weight of the reality crashed down upon them. This wasn't just about losing a contract. This was about their survival. The beacon was their lifeline, their only hope of staying afloat, and I had just calmly, cleanly, and decisively severed the rope. The company they had stolen from me, the legacy they had run into the ground, was now, for all intents and purposes, dead. And I was the one holding the shovel. Leo finally snapped. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a clatter that echoed in the tomb-like silence. "You!" he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red, a vein throbbing in his temple. "You did this to us! You did this on purpose! This was revenge!" His voice was ragged, cracking with desperation. Sarah, finding her voice at last, joined the chorus, her tone a high-pitched, venomous shriek. "After everything we did for you, we gave you a chance in this company. We try to protect you from the hard decisions, and you repay us by destroying your own father's legacy. You selfish, ungrateful." She couldn't even finish the sentence, her fury rendering her incoherent. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on my blueprints. I looked at their contorted, ugly faces, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. They were strangers to me. "I didn't do anything to you, Leo," I said, my voice level and unwavering. "I did this for me. You were the ones who told me my work was a liability. You were the ones who said my focus on emotion and soul had no place in this business." I gestured to the beautiful rendering on the table. "It turns out that was the only thing of value you ever had. You didn't just push me out. You pushed out the company's only remaining asset." I stood up then, my movements slow and deliberate. I carefully rolled up my blueprints, the sound of the thick paper crinkling seeming impossibly loud in the charged atmosphere. "This isn't revenge," I said, my voice softening with a final sad finality. "This is just consequences. You built your business on a foundation of arrogance and dismissal. It was never going to last." I slid the blueprints back into my portfolio and snapped it shut. I walked to the door, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their stunned, hateful glares burning into my back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard the first sob, a wrenching, ugly sound of complete and utter defeat. It was the sound of my past finally being laid to rest. A week later, I was sitting in that same little coffee shop where Arthur Vance had rekindled the fire in my soul. The air smelled of roasted beans and possibility. I was idly scrolling through my phone when I saw it. The lead story in the city's online business journal. The headline was stark. "Ethel Architecture's beacon of hope shines bright as Miller and Son faces imminent foreclosure." The article was glowing. It lauded my human-centric design, my innovative use of sustainable materials, and my deep understanding of public space. It painted me as a fresh, visionary new force in the city's architectural landscape. Tucked away in the third paragraph was a brief, almost clinical mention that Miller and Son Construction, a firm run by my brother, Leo Miller, had been a finalist for the contract and was now reportedly ceasing operations pending bankruptcy proceedings. The public narrative was set. I wasn't the vindictive sister. I was David, who had bested Goliath. My success was the story, their failure merely a footnote. My phone buzzed. It was a call from Arthur. "I saw the news," he said, his voice booming with pride. "I always told them you had more talent in your little finger than that brother of yours had in his entire body. Soul won, Natalie. It always does." We spoke for a few minutes, and he congratulated me not just on the win, but on my resilience. As I hung up, I saw a text message notification pop up on my screen. It was from Leo. My finger hovered over it. A part of me was curious to see what final, desperate venom he could possibly spew, but then I stopped. What could he possibly say that would matter now? An apology? It would be self-serving. An accusation? I no longer cared. A plea for help? The time for that was long past. Reading it would be like willingly sipping a few more drops of a poison I had finally purged from my system. With a sense of profound and quiet liberation, I blocked his number. Then I blocked Sarah's. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was a simple, silent act of self-preservation. It was the closing of a door, quietly and firmly, on a room I never needed to enter again. 18 months later, I stood on the top level of the nearly completed Lakeside Beacon Pavilion, a hard hat on my head and a deep sense of peace in my heart. The setting sun cast long shadows across the city, and the lake glittered like a field of scattered diamonds. The building around me was alive. Construction workers were packing up for the day, their easy laughter echoing through the vast open space. My team, including Mark, now my senior partner, stood beside me, looking over the final phase schematics. The pavilion was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The sail-like roof soared into the sky, a symbol of hope and forward momentum. The green roof was already being planted, a lush carpet of life in the heart of the city. It was real. I had built this. Not just the structure, but the company, the team, the feeling of collaborative respect that permeated everything we did. Ethel Architecture had become a thriving firm, known for its integrity and its groundbreaking designs. We were a family, a chosen one, built not in blood, but on a shared passion and mutual respect. I thought about my father's legacy then. For so long, I had believed his legacy was Miller and Son, the company with his name on the sign. I had been so wrong. His legacy wasn't a company, it was a set of principles. It was the belief that a building should have a soul, that empathy was a tool as important as any hammer or saw. My brother had inherited the name, but I had inherited the belief. By building this pavilion, by creating my own firm on my own terms, I was honoring my father more profoundly than I ever could have in that stifling, toxic office. I had built my own legacy right alongside his. I've learned so much since that terrible day I signed away my birthright. I learned that the things my brother and his wife saw as my greatest liabilities, my emotion, my passion, my focus on the human experience, were in fact my greatest strengths. They were my superpower, just as Arthur had said. They tried to put me in a box, the small, confining box of the decorator, the little sister, the emotional woman. But what they failed to understand is that a box, when you're an architect, can also be a foundation. They gave me the foundation of my freedom, and for that, in a strange, ironic way, I suppose I should be grateful. The most important lesson, though, was about validation. I spent so many years craving their approval, desperate for them to see my worth. I realize now that seeking validation from people who are determined to misunderstand you is a fool's errand. It's like trying to see your reflection in a shattered mirror. The only approval that truly matters is the one that comes from within. The moment I stopped needing them to believe in me was the moment I truly started to believe in myself. My journey was a painful one, but it led me here, to this place of peace and purpose, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Sometimes, the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the greatest gift of all, the roaring fire of motivation you need to prove them wrong, not for their sake, but for your own. Family, I've learned, is not just about the blood you share. It's about the people who lift you up, who see your soul and celebrate it, who help you build the life you were meant to live. Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening to my story. I'm so grateful for this community. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to find your own path? Share your story in the comments below, because every story shared is a beacon for someone else who might be feeling lost in the dark. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. Remember to be the architect of your own life. Build it with integrity, fill it with soul, and never, ever let anyone tell you that your passion is a liability. Thank you for listening.